afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here for this marker unveiling. I'm Heather Bratland, one of the 2 historic resources officers. My colleague, Michelle McCullough, is back behind us, and the marker program is absolutely our favorite part of our job duties. So you all make it special. Thank you for being here. Right now, I'd like to call up Miss Dallas McCall, who's going to ring a bell to get us started. Thank you.
Where's the mail?
He's sitting right here.
Wait, don't go nowhere yet. Wait a minute. That's right, Mama got to get up too. That is so cool. Mama, make sure you keep the program. That's her first stage event. Okay? Resume.
Tough act to follow right there. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alan Jones, Mayor of Winston-Salem, and it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this unveiling ceremony today. We'll say a little bit more about that, but was Dennis, Reverend Bishop here for the invocation? Where's he at? There he is right there. I'm sorry, I had his baseball hat on. I missed him.
I used to jump up.
I know.
Mayor, but I'm getting younger.
Reverend Dennis Bishop from First Waughtown Baptist Church.
Yep.
Good to see you,
Good to
brother.
see you, man. Always good to see
See
you.
you too.
Thank you for the good job you do.
Recognize Boston Thurman, Kimberly Park.
You better know it.
You better know it.
Good stuff came
Good
out of
stuff.
the project, didn't it? Let's pray. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on our way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, Lord, keep us forever in the path, we pray. Thank you for such a glorious day. It's the day you've made, and we have come to rejoice and be glad in it. Father, we thank you as we come together today to celebrate and commemorate those trailblazers, patriots, matriarchs, as we stand here on this hallowed ground today. We thank you for just the memory and the reflection of those who have paved the way. We stand on the shoulders of men and women that we call heroes. Didn't have much education, but they had revelation. Some didn't have eyesight, but they had insight. And we thank you, Lord, for how you guided their footsteps, how you blessed them, and families that remain today carrying out the legacy of those that have gone before us. We do give you praise and glory and honor. Thank you for our mayor today and all of our elected officials and every person who have gathered here today. May our efforts of unity and binding our hearts and minds in one spirit carry out these legacies so that our children can someday stand and be proud of all of the accomplishments that's been made in this city, in this state, and in others wherever they may be. Bless us individually today and bless us collectively. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend. Beautiful prayer. Well, we're here today to unveil the historic marker over here, and we've just been so thrilled over the past, 3 days, Michelle. We've hosted the North Carolina Historic Properties Historic Preservation Association of North Carolina here, and we spoke, Mayor Pro Tem and I and the other council members spoke to them, yesterday, and we were telling them about the fact that Winston-Salem has had a very aggressive historic marker program. We've done about 69 of these around the county, and I'm really proud to say that 65% of these markers represent and honor African-American history in our community. Because unfortunately, so many of those treasures are not with us anymore, and so we've had to just use the markers to remind people of what was here at one time. So let me, with that, introduce Mayor Pro Tem Denise Adams from the North Ward, and then followed her by Councilmember James Taylor from the Southeast Ward, where we are located. So, Mayor Pro Tem.
Good afternoon. And some of you, like I said, the mayor and I have been rolling since about 8 o'clock this morning. We've been at several events together today. We just left one over at the Union Station commemorating the desegregation of Forsyth County schools 50 years ago. As he said, with the preservation organization here the past 3 days, I want to thank Michelle and Heather for the city. Please give them a hand. These women work tirelessly. And I think back when I got elected in 2009, Michelle and I hooked up. And when they brought the first thing to us about a marker for, recognition, I said, I'm not comfortable with none of this anymore. I said, where is my history? Where is our history? I said, I'm charging you and tasking you to go collect and start to commemorate our history. And they have done that, and they'll continue to do that. With this, as the mayor said, we continue to recognize that our history was displaced, usurped, and removed, and shoveled over with dirt. But we have it in our hearts and our minds, and it's up to us to never let it die, and to make sure the generations behind us and the children understand what we did for Winston-Salem, because Winston-Salem wouldn't be Winston-Salem without African Americans, okay? With that saying, thank you all so much for being here today, and let's just keep this going. But I do add one more caveat, Michelle and Heather. I told Aaron and staff, I love the markers, but I need some pictures. I need something visually so my family and community can see the memories of what we were and what we came from and where we lived and where we thrived and where we worked. Because a lot of us wouldn't be who we are without that, our ancestors and our family, as well as our community. God bless.
Good afternoon. My name is James Taylor, and I bring greetings on behalf of the residents of the sensational Southeast Ward. And I truly believe that the work that the Waughtown Freedman School has done, the work that the families continue to do, is one of the reasons why we're so sensational. Before I say anything else, I also want you heard from our Mayor Pro Tem and our Mayor. I also want to recognize Councilmember Larson, Councilmember Scipio, and Councilmember Mundy, who's with us today. And together we work to make sure that this community moves forward. I will say, in terms of the Waughtown Freedman School, I was not around in 1865, obviously. But what that says to me is that the trees that we plant now, the seeds that we plant now, other people who come behind us will get to enjoy that. And I think the makers and the founders of this school, they knew that. Bishop, I heard in your prayer, it is a fact that we do stand on the shoulders of so many who have gone before us. And it's important that we continue to memorize that and remember that and continue to move forward. I just want to thank every one of you for being here today. I'm going to take my seat, but I will say that you will constantly see the seeds that the Waughtown Freedman School sown show up all over this community. Over the last 10 years, we've invested well over $60 million into this community. From those who I see Waughtown, First Waughtown's with us today. Well, every time you go to church on Sunday, you look across the street, you see Bellevue is being renovated. We've got the quarry, we've got Salem Lake, we've got millions of dollars that we poured into this community because we're standing on the shoulders of the investment that this Freedom School made. And we will not let that go untouched, and we will continue to move this community forward. Now, when you call names, you get in trouble. So I thank all city staff for helping to do this. You've heard from everybody, but I want to call one name that you all know. He is always behind the scenes. I consider him as our local historian. Anything like this, you may not see him, but he's somewhere behind the scenes making it happen. Please give a warm round of applause for Spencer McCall. Thank you, sir. I don't know if he does this for a living, but you are a true historian, brother. And we wouldn't be able to do the work that we do without you. So thank you so much. And to all of you, to the families, to the descendants of the Freedom School, I want to thank all of you for the work that you do and what you continue to do to help our city to be a better place to live, work, and relax. Thank you.
Thank you, council member. And Spencer, I guess we've got to put you on the salary now, I assume. Councilmember Taylor did recognize our council members that are with us today. I understand from them that you all are good with no comments, just thumbs up. Thank you for being here, for sure. We do have a letter from Governor Roy Cooper. It's going to be read by Jeanette Heinz Kelly. Ms. Kelly, right there.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. As you say, my name is Jeanette Heinz Kelly, and I am a descendant of the ones that started the Freedman School on both sides, grandfather and grandmother. So it's a pleasure for me to stand before you today. State of North Carolina, Office of the Governor, October 29, 2022. Dear friends, as Governor of North Carolina, I am honored to welcome you to the dedication of the Waughtown Freedman School Historic Marker. I know this is an exciting and much anticipated event. When the Waughtown Freedman School was organized in 1866 by newly freed people of Waughtown, it set the stage for a remarkable history as a school, as a civic meeting place, and as a home for the Black Baptists of the area. Many of the students have made important and lasting contributions to our community. I am sorry that my schedule prevents me from being with you for the momentous occasion, but I am grateful to you for recognizing the importance of the history of the Waughtown Freedman School. With warm regards, I am, very truly yours, Roy Cooper.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. I was a little bit remiss when we were talking about the historic preservation meeting here in Winston-Salem that our own Michelle McCullough received a very distinguished award from them, the Stipes Award, and we're very proud of you. Obviously, the hard work that you do for our committee. Very prestigious award that you received. And I also see former Councilmember Dan Bessie, who's joined us. So, Bessie, thank you for being with us as well. So as you can see from our program, we have a number of speakers. I'm just going to introduce everyone at one time, and they'll just follow each other as they come up. First, we have Tina Thacker, who is with our own Historic Resources Commission. Spencer McCall, that you've already been recognized by Councilmember Taylor. Susanna Ritz-Mallette. Michelle Mack. The Minister Nawa Center, Foy family. Thurman Regional Carter. The Heinz, Yokley, Wright, and Maston families is the representative there. Angela Charles, who's representing the Charles, Fries, and Morris families. Claire Caldwell, who's representing the Fries family. Ernestine Slade, the Butler and Lee families. Janice Jones, representing the Yokley family. Sarah Mary Stephanie, representing the Pickard and Perry families. And Norma Coley, who's representing the Campbell family. So if you would, follow each other in that order, and we'll start with Ms. Thacker.
Good afternoon. I'm a member of the Forsyth County Historic Resources Commission. I was recommended for appointment to the mayor by Dan Bessie, who is in the crowd today again. This marker committee is very important. It started establishing markers throughout the city in 2001, and to date, we have over 65 markers throughout the city. Historic markers help residents remember and learn important places, events, and people in the community's collective history. These markers identify a place on the landscape and in history that should not be forgotten. Today, we celebrate the Waughtown Freedman School. This Freedman School was the first in Forsyth County, founded in 1866, just 1 year after emancipation was announced at St. Philip's Moravian Church in Salem. The Freedmen of Waughtown built their schoolhouse on the same lot as their church. The cemetery associated with the church sits behind these houses at the end of Colony Street. 156 years ago, men, women, and children would have begun to openly and freely attend school right here. With thanks to Spencer McCall for applying for this marker to shine light on this important history. And thank you to all of you for attending this celebration today.
Thank you. I'll be brief and quick. I'm just kidding. What we now know as Waughtown was organized in May of 1806 by a man named Charles Baggy. He was a renegade from Salem. His father was T-Baggy. It's the T-Baggy store that's in Salem now. We know that 2 years later, he brought a Negro woman he called the Negro Rachel. And Charles, even after being allowed to come to Salem, he kind of pushed those boundaries of slavery in Salem. So he was a kind of a renegade person. And you see it in Waughtown now. Around 1815, it was sold to James Waugh, and there's a Waugh descendant who's here today. On both sides of her family. And from that time, it came on as Waughtown. And so this was the area that people came from Salem to do that which they couldn't do in Salem, like buy brandy, go to the circus, etc. And things I won't discuss in front of all you guys right now. James Waugh was known to own slaves, and he also was, the Negro quarters from Salem was also nearby. So therefore, with all these people who were slaves here in this area, we shouldn't be surprised that after freedom, as Lee Freeze says, and Lee Freeze has cousins who are here right now, and the Charleses also, he said after the war ended, there was a colony of blacks here in this area, which is amazing. But what really is more surprising than that is that after the war, we find a very vibrant middle class of black people here in Salem. Now remember, this was a time when most enslaved people were kind of, freedmen actually were kind of, poor, very poor, and finding ways to survive. So here you have in Waughtown this very middle class folks who were black. So what were their jobs? Over half of the people who were in Waughtown after freedom, we know had middle class occupations. Amazing. There were 2 blacksmiths, a wheelwright, a shoemaker and a bootmaker. There were people that worked in the cotton mill and the wool mill, and they're here also. They're employees of the railroad. There was even a man that made wagons. Amazing. And there were 3 farmers, meaning they actually owned their own land and were not sharecroppers. This is after the Civil War. Amazing history here in Waughtown. Living here at that time were people by the name of Stafford, Wheeler, Light, Jones, Foy, Maston, Lee, Harrison, Wall, Banner, Freeze, Butler, Butner, Morris, Foltz, Reich, Yokley, Snyder, Reed, Bray, Nemely, Adams, Hamilton, Bloom, Byerly, Carr, Holland, Rothrock, Heinz, Spock, Malloy, Foster, and Schober. And many of these folks were numbered amongst the early black leaders of this county. For example, Lewis Banner, who was a minister, enslavement and after slavery, right here in Waughtown and Salem. There was also John and Mary Freeze, who began the church here in Waughtown for Baptists in this county. So the Black Baptist movement began right here in Waughtown. And they also have people here today too on program. As were Harris and Paulina Freeze, who were Methodists. It's amazing to find out that after slavery, they would be, on one night they were Baptist, and they would then go and see Harris and Paulina the next night and become Methodist. There was also Louis Foltz, whose parents were in botany from Salem, who began St. Philip's, all living here in this area. William Butler, who actually was very wealthy, as was his friend, Mr. Waugh, Robert Waugh. They also were in politics. And even Louis Hagee bought land here. He was a very famous man from Salem. Bought land here in Waughtown and Yonktown, which is Little Manhattan and Bellevue. By 1870, some of those blacks that owned land in Waughtown were Aaron Stafford, Clark Light, Louis Foltz, Thomas Butler, Howard Wheeler, and Mr. Waugh. And then soon thereafter, here are the black landlords in Waughtown. D.A. Bray, who owned 10 acres of land, William Thompson and Teresa Freeze Butler, they owned 40 acres of land. Louis Foltz, 4 acres. John Johnson, 23 acres of land. Samuel Ratliff, 2 acres. David Reed, 10 acres. George Reynolds, 30 acres. Henry Reynolds, an acre. Mr. Scales, 9 acres. Aaron Stafford, 20 acres. And Mr. Yokley, 6 acres. This is 5 years after freedom, right here in this area. So we ask ourselves, what was their main goal after freedom? And to answer that question, let's look to their actions. And we see that within 1 year of being free, what do? They organize a freedman school here in Waughtown. Now, we think about that just because it's good for in math and writing and reading. But we also know there was a state law passed that same year that said if a child or a black man or woman was just loitering around, they could be put in jail. So therefore, it was important to find a place for the kids to go because they could be put in jail for just being on the streets. So there was an extra effort beyond just learning to have this school here. And most of the Freedmen schools that started at that time were started by white donors. But this school wasn't the case. We know that the black people of Waughtown paid for, built, and paid tuition for this school. That's amazing. I couldn't imagine all of us today having have our own school and paying for our staff and the insurance and the, all the school supplies. They did that 1 year after freedom. In that same year, there were schools all over the state, and there was a school in Thomasville, Salisbury, Wilmington, and Waughtown. Amazing. The next year, there's a school opened in Salem and Happy Hill, and many of the folks here were also a part of that effort. So we know that these areas were very tied together, those two communities, Waughtown and Salem. And there was then one opened in Louisville the same year thereafter. And a neat little fact for people from Waughtown is the Lewis people that started that also had ties to Waughtown too, Lewis people. And then there was also one in Clemensville 2 years later. So why was the school here special? We discussed how they paid for it themselves, but they had a teacher also who was a great teacher here too, and we'll discuss him pretty soon. But someone wrote the paper in Raleigh about this school, and they said, the men and women of this village who are freedmen deserve praise for their efforts in raising and supporting a school. It is, as I believe, and they said this in the paper, the first and only freedmen school in the county. They organized it themselves. And they then said, they asked for some donations from white benefactors, and were denied that, but they paid for it themselves. And the teacher was Mr. W.G. Kerner, as in Kernersville. The grandson of the founder of Kernersville was the teacher here. A good man who was very loyal, et cetera, it said. But it was also amazing that when 2 years after that, they had teachers who were black teachers also. So 2 years after freedom, and they have black teachers here in this area teaching with Mr. Kerner, our kids. Utterly amazing. We know that the next year after that school started, there were 25 kids in the school here and 12 in the school in Salem, and both schools began to grow. I'm sorry. We also know it was used for things beyond the school. Thank you so much. It was used as a meeting place for the freedmen. They had meetings here, and they were around politics and so forth. They organized. And also a church began here in this area. Lee Freeze, who again I mentioned earlier, he said that after freedom, his parents began to have meetings for Baptists in their cabin on Waughtown Street. And all these things are right in this area, which is amazing to me. And then in time, of course, it grew. And their cabin couldn't hold the people. And so where did they go to meet? In the Freedmen's Church, in the Freedmen's School, the Freedmen's School. And soon a man came to this area by the name of Reverend George W. Holland. And all people that are Baptists know that name from around the county, a very famous man. And he organized the Baptists in this area. And the history tells us that his followers were all from Waughtown. Here are their names: Mary Freeze Leinbach Morris, Harriet Schober Freeze, Lou Foy, Lottie Reich Heinz and her daughters, Margaret Reich Maston and Kelly Reich Yokley, and Kelly's husband, Alfred Yokley, and her grandson, Bingo Foster. And all of these people have people sitting here today. Amazing. As they grew, they moved to Happy Hill and around town to Winston, and part of the group became what we now know as First Baptist, which is amazing. And the Waughtown group supported First Baptist and loved First Baptist. But they also had meetings here and chapel services here. And they had weddings here at the church and the school and funerals also. So they were both supporting both churches. And around 1900 or before that, Reverend Holland told his deacon, J. Pinckney Joyce, go to Waughtown. We all know that name in First Waughtown. And have those folks have their own building. And we find that on May 4th, Addison Jeffers, Julius Cruz, Walter Clark, who owned a store and was a blacksmith, and they were our trustees, bought land right here from Giles and Liza Banner. And their great-great-granddaughter was my scout leader years ago here in Bellevue, Mrs. Mansell, on the Plank Road, Waughtown Street. And within a short time, they had their first wooden church here in Waughtown. And this church is now known as First Waughtown Baptist Church. Now, I should mention that we also have folks here from First Baptist Church. Thank y'all for coming. We do not know when the school closed or why it closed or how it closed, but we do know its impact has gone on even now for all of us. Now this to me was crazily amazing. Within 5 years of its opening, the school had at least 3 of its students in college at Lincoln University. Samuel Wall, James Francis Schober, and John Wall. And then one of those 3 goes to Howard, and he is the first person from the Piedmont to go to Howard University. Wow. And his name is Dr. James Francis Schober, the first black licensed doctor in the state. Wow. And so while it was organized in 1866 and years ago, its impact upon blacks and whites in Bellevue and Waughtown still lives on. And here are a few of those from the Bellevue-Waughtown community. We can't even count the teachers, the principals, professors, and ministers of the soldiers in every single war. Every war. They fought in those wars. Attorneys, doctors, professors, a judge in Greensboro, who is her cousin, and my cousin too, and our cousin too, the Harrisons. A store owners, insurance salesmen, writers, poets, authors, artists, professional singers, the earliest black professional model in the country. Firemen, engineers, accountants, an NBA player, we all know him, his family, and even one of the first black NASCAR drivers to appear on TV. So the work of the Freedmen still lives on in us. Thank you all for this great day. All of you and all of you. Thank you.
Well done.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Susanna from down the road in Kernersville, and I'd like to thank Spencer for inviting me to speak here today and also for his copious amounts of help with my notes. I am the Operations and Programs Manager of Historic Kerner's Folly, which means that I get to do everything from catching bats to cataloging buttons. But my favorite thing to do is to meet new people and to share and learn history. So I'm very excited to be here today. Born on the 27th of October in 1835 to Philip and Judith Garner Kerner in what is now known as Kernersville, William Gaston Kerner was the first teacher at the Waughtown Freedman School. William was named William Gaston in honor of the eminent North Carolina lawyer and Whig politician who was also a friend of Philip, whose party advocated for internal improvement projects to aid transportation and public institutions such as schools, mental hospitals, and to better conditions in penitentiaries. William G., or Gaston as he was called, married Elizabeth Ann Wilson Meredith of Henry County, Virginia. He is closely aligned with his side of the family and their businesses, and both William and his wife are buried in the Kerner plot at Kernersville's Moravian God's Acre Cemetery. Despite the fact that William and Elizabeth had no children of their own, he was committed to the then radical notion of the importance of providing a formal education for people who were recently enslaved. To better understand his commitment, perhaps we can look to his family history for inspiration and clarity. William Gaston's father, Philip Kerner, was an astute businessman, and his father, Joseph Kerner, came to this area in 1785 from a town in the Black Forest region of what is today Germany called Furtwangen. Sorry for the pronunciation of that. Arriving in America at age 16, Joseph eventually accumulated about 1,000 acres of farmland. In 1817, he took over the operation of an inn that became known as Kerner's Crossroads, providing a namesake for the town that would eventually be incorporated as Kernersville. It is documented in census records that Gaston's father, Philip, and his wife, Judith, did participate in the institution of slavery, despite Philip's described revulsion for the practice and Judith's Quaker background, which actively practiced manumission. In the book Joseph of Kernersville, written by William Gaston's nephew, Joel Gilmer Kerner, Jr., who grew up at Kerner's Folly in Kernersville, it is written, "Near the Kerner plantation to the southeast there lived the Kinnaman family who owned many enslaved people. Among these was a young woman, aged 22, named Clara, sometimes spelled Clary, and her mother and sisters. For some time prior to 1842, Clara had been hired by Philip from Kinnaman as a personal maid to his wife Judith. In 1842, John Kinnaman died and his property were to be sold at auction. Clara's mother, Charity, was anxious that her daughters find the best possible situations and avoid being sold elsewhere to a worse fate. Charity, Clara's mother, earnestly entreated Philip to buy Clara at the sale. She had also made the same entreaty to Judith's father, William Gardner. Judith liked Clara and saw the benefits of using Clara's skills and experience. But Judith's father, William, was a Quaker and flat out refused to participate in this system of human bondage. Kerner family tradition holds that he had given his daughter Judith a cupful of gold coins, and it was arranged that he would bid in Clara at the sale and would transfer his bid to Philip, and that Judith could make payment with the gold that he had given her. Thus, the relationship between the family and Clara was cemented, even resulting in a new name for Clara, Aunt Dealey, which arose from her use of the word dearie, a term of endearment for the young children of the family, and the children's inability to pronounce the R in the word. After Judith's untimely death, Aunt Dealey raised William Gaston and his siblings, including Jewel, who built Kernersville's landmark, Kerner's Folly. Officially freed by the passing of the 13th Amendment, Aunt Dealey remained with the family. Since Aunt Dealey, to our knowledge, never learned to read or write, because it was illegal for most of her life, we may never know her true thoughts and feelings on her decision to remain in Kernersville. We do know there was an extremely strong bond between Clara and Jewel. She encouraged him to marry, to have children, and when he did so, and his house filled up with visitors, Jewel built a fine 2-room cottage to the rear of his property, featuring many of Jewel's trademark interior designs, including ornamental lion's head cartouches, egg and dart molding, elaborate crown molding, and more. When Philip Kerner passed on in 1875, he left Clara a rental property and a tenant house in Winston. As a property owner, she earned money by renting the buildings. Clara was also known to be a talented weaver, once described in a letter as having made from the loom she had in her cottage $12 in gold for enough material for a suit of clothes, and that she was saving all of it. After being with the Kerner family for over 53 years, Clara passed in 1896 at the age of 76 years old. An announcement of her death was published in the Twin City Sentinel. Her funeral service was performed on the north lawn of Kerner's Folly, conducted by both a black minister and a white minister, which was unusual during that period. A large crowd was in attendance, and Jewel planned to bury her in God's Acre at Kernersville, Moravian, with other Kerner family members, but the church denied his request. Jewel was angry and hurt, but he quickly came up with a solution. He purchased a piece of land adjoining the Moravian graveyard, buried Clara near the entrance of the private Kerner family plot, and placed a headstone on her grave. About a year after she was laid to rest, Jewel built a brick wall around the plot, which can still be seen today. Her headstone inscription reads, "Clara Kerner, honest and faithful to every trust, by the loss of our mother at an early age, she assumed the special care and training of we the children of Philip Kerner, for which we all place this stone to her memory." We do not fully know why William Gaston was so committed to the education of newly freed enslaved people. Perhaps it was for his love of Clara, who had reared him like a mother after his own mother's passing, or perhaps it was due to his family's Quaker affiliations. We think it was perhaps the distinctive and complex confluence of the two. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle, and I am a Wall descendant. My third great-grandfather, Robert Wall, an enslaved member of Waughtown, North Carolina, was born on the Wall homestead and plantation in 1828 to Sultana Wall. In the year of 1851, North Carolina recognized the cohabitation between Robert and Mary Ann Harrison. They later officially married in 1866. Their union would bring about 9 children who were born and raised on the Harrison's Hamburg plantation in Walnut Cove with Mary Ann's extended family. My third great-grandfather was involved in the construction of 2 schools. One, the Waughtown Freedman School that opened in 1866. In the year of 1867, the Freedmen of Salem held a meeting and elected Robert Wall along with Alex Vogler and Lewis Hedge, a committee authorizing the men to apply for grants for land and the construction of a schoolhouse that would be in use for the Freedmen of Salem. The committee was granted land that was to be located on the hillside south of Brothers Spring and east of Walltown Road. Shortly followed, the construction of a second schoolhouse would begin. Robert, commonly known as Bobbin, was well known throughout the community. Not only was he involved in education, he was involved in politics, voting for both Republicans and Democrats during elections. Robert became one of the wealthiest Black citizens in the Waughtown area that was highly respected. So where and how did he make his money? To answer, he was a boot and shoemaker, a trade that he most likely learned while enslaved to James Wall and his wife, Elizabeth Robinette. He and his family owned and ran a shoe and a grocery store. Robert's involvement in the community and his efforts towards education displayed through his children. We know that one of his sons went to Lincoln University in the late 1800s, after slavery, of course. And two of his daughters became teachers right here in Waughtown. Although it is unclear which daughter ran the school in 1880, we know that either Sally or Elsie had control and seemed to be getting along quite well. According to an article that was published in the People's Press on Thursday, January 29, 1880. In that same article, it is mentioned that women are not fit to have such power over public schools. Little did people know that the Walls and the formerly enslaved population of the community was resilient and shall continue to strive and prosper. Robert and Mary's children, John, Lee, James, Sultana, Sally, Elsie, Mary, Peter, and Alfred, continued their parents' legacy by owning stores in not only North Carolina, but also Montana. They held city and district positions right here in North Carolina counties of Forsyth and Guilford. Some of them became teachers, and let's acknowledge some of them married other community figures. Elsie married a doctor. Sally married a Buffalo soldier who was a Medal of Honor recipient. Sultana married into a family like her own that dove into politics and the medical field. As a descendant of those that were enslaved on the Waughtown, on the Wall homestead and plantation and the Harrison plantation, it is an honor to be present for the unveiling of this historical marker. It represents acknowledgement of those who dedicated their lives, instilling a better future in Waughtown's formerly enslaved and free population. On behalf of my family, thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I am Nawatha Carter. I represent the Foy family. Born enslaved about 1845 to Alex Nelson and Sally Jordan, Lou Foy, who was my second great-grandmother, having lived in Salem while enslaved, she was taken to Virginia, where before the Civil War brought emancipation, and after emancipation, she walked back to the area and settled in Waughtown. Lou was no doubt one of the adults who attended the night school at the Freedmen's School in Waughtown. Attending night school allowed her to further her education, and the education that received there helped her to set her children on a course for success. As a single mother, Lou went on to purchase land, and she was one of the leaders in the formation of the Baptist Church and is named as one of Reverend George Holland's early followers. Her children were my great-grandfather, William Foy, Lee Foy, Arthur Foy, Charlie Foy, Betty Foy, Seth, and Jerome Foy. William Foy, like his mother, also owned property in this community, and he served as the sexton of the Bellevue School. Arthur Foy was a shoemaker who owned shoe stores in Waughtown and Winston and then in Norfolk, Virginia. Charlie Ford became a receiving clerk in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Betty Forsyth became one of Forsyth County's earliest female ministers. Jerome Ford, who moved to Philadelphia, where he served as a teamster. When I think of Lou Ford and our pioneer ancestors, this quote comes to mind. With our future ahead of us and the ancestors beside us, there is nothing we can't do. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Thurman R. Carter, and I am honored to say that I'm from the Bellevue community and probably the direct descendant of a number of lines of the individuals on this paper. So my family tree converges here, and I thank my cousin Spencer for actually asking me to come up and speak a little bit today. As a descendant of Timothy Zober Zeverly, my fifth great-grandfather, who was born in Africa around 1785 and was enslaved in Salem and in this community, it is my pleasure to be here today. My family has been here for over 200 years. Yes, that's right, over 200 years. Here in this community. This land is truly sacred to many of us. Like our Yokley cousins, the Heinz family is often synonymous with Davidson County. However, they too have had a historic presence in this community since enslavement. In August of 1845, John Johannes Heinz died in the present-day Walberg community of Davidson County, and upon his death, he had 5 slaves, one of whom was George Heinz, my second great-grandfather, and another was Caesar Heinz. Born around 1815, Caesar was willed to John's son-in-law, David Smith, and hence he was in the Forsyth County by emancipation. Sometimes living in Freeburg and Waughtown before selling in Winston, where he bought a house and several lots. Caesar was an early elder in Waughtown. He was a registrant to the Constitutional Convention for the neighboring Matthews TWP, and some of his children were educated at the Waughtown Freedman School. Born around 1810 and also enslaved by the Heinz family, Lottie Heinz Stafford Wright was the mother of Callie Wright Yokley, Margaret Wright Maston, Daniel Butler Wright, Cornelius Wright, Emery Wright, and Anna Wright, and her family would also be instrumentally involved with the Freedman School and the development of the Baptist Church, namely First Waughtown Baptist Church, which I am a member, and First Baptist. Lottie's brother Richard Dick Wright and his children and stepchildren were also involved in this effort. Lottie, her daughter Margaret Wright Maston, her daughter Callie Wright Yokley, and Callie's husband Alfred Yokley were numbered amongst the early followers of Reverend Holland, and her brother Richard's son Giles Banner is known to have donated land on Waughtown Street, not far from where we presently stand, to First Waughtown Baptist Church. Time will not permit me to name each of the individuals within these families who have supported or attended the Waughtown School, but the educational impact that they received at the school lives on in the strong foundations within this community and First Waughtown and First Baptist churches that many of us enjoy today. So thank you for your time and attention.
Good afternoon again. Good afternoon. It's a blessing to be here. I want to acknowledge our elected officials and Dr. Bishop in this community for this grand occasion. I am Angela Charles, and I am representing the Charles Freed and Morris bloodline. And like Thurman, I am also the 5th grandchild of Timothy Zeverly, who was enslaved in Salem at the paper mill. My family also has inherited these sacred grounds for over 200 years. My second great-grandparents, John and Mary Freeze, moved here immediately after emancipation and lived only a few steps from where we are currently. Famed Forsyth County historian Dr. Adelaide Freeze recounts in her book, Forsyth, a County on the March, how the Black Baptist movement of Forsyth County started in John and Mary's cabin. While John worked in the Freeze wool mill by day, Mary spread the word to the neighbors of their nightly prayer meetings. When evening came, all of the freedmen in the community were said to have gathered in John and Mary's cabin. For these Baptist prayer meetings grew, and these meetings grew to the point where they were held in the Waughtown Freedman School building. I forgot to say that I am Bellevue raised and first Waughtown bred. So I wanted to put that in there. So this movement was the beginning of the Black Baptist Church in Forsyth County. That includes First Baptist Church and First Waughtown Baptist Church. So can you imagine the great time of worship and fellowship that would have been had right here in this spot over 150 years ago today? John and Mary had several children: Ella, Anna, Lee, who we've heard about, Jane, John, Fred, Grace, and Eva. And how the Charleses fit into that bloodline is that Jane Freeze married Austin Charles, they are my great grandparents. My grandfather, George Charles Sr., was a deacon at First Waughtown Baptist. After John's death, Mary married her widowed neighbor, Charles Morris. And this is where the Morris side comes in. And there were several descendants there: Adelaide, James, Charles, Jesse, Margaret, Nellie, Emma Morris, who was Reverend Pickney Joyce's wife, Alice Morris, Bessie Morris, Judy Morris, and Carrie Morris. And the younger children from this family all attended the Waughtown Freedman School. The most notable name of the Morrises in this bloodline would be a local famous missionary, and her name was Addie Morris. Employed by the Women's Missionary Society of Chicago, Addie was said to have attended Shaw University and was a Baptist missionary in Africa. Upon returning to Forsyth County, she started the first grammar school in the city of Winston-Salem for Black children in the basement of First Baptist. Soon a building was purchased adjacent to this property, and it was named the Addie Morris School. The Negro Baptist History Anthology of North Carolina records that there were about 10,000 colored people in Winston-Salem, and that Miss Morris, seeing so many children coming up in idleness, felt something needed to be done to change their conditions, and so she started this school. The school was composed entirely from pupils from Winston-Salem, and an incentive was given to several to pursue a higher course of study in Shaw University and elsewhere. It will never be known the real good that this school did in shaping the life and character of so many under the training of this godly woman. Sister Morris, as she was known, gave her life unreservedly to the cause of Christ, both amongst the old and the young. She not only conducted this school during her lifetime, but she gave energy and care to the establishment of an orphan home 2.5 miles from Winston-Salem. After her death in 1907, her sister, Miss Emma Joyce, who was the wife of Reverend Pickney Joyce, took charge of the school. However, Miss Joyce's health was poor, so largely the work of the school came to an end. My second great aunt died in 1907, and she's buried in the Bellevue Cemetery. However, true to the Charles style, I have to leave you with something to think about. Addie Morris's death is not the end of the story. Her legacy of education lives on today because we know in our bloodline goes from GED to JD to MD. We are the descendants of a people that, in spite of opposition, had hope and faith that allowed them to persevere and to take action to educate the formerly enslaved, disadvantaged children and adults who were eager to learn and to contribute to society. So the unveiling of this historic marker today should resonate in our consciousness the responsibility to ensure that disadvantaged members of our communities are given the opportunity for a great education, upward mobility, and equal opportunity. To do that, we must examine ourselves to eliminate the shackles of divisiveness and focus on what we have in common as individuals living in this country, because we all have the right to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So today is a great day because the historical significance of what occurred on this land is being honored. But it is also a great day because it compels us to examine our own personal responsibility in our own way to ensure that the legacy of what occurred at the corner of Waughtown and Colony Street lives on. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. I am Clara Kleiner Caldwell, and I lived down the street, right where Food Line is. And Waughtown Street, when it was unpaved, it was called Plank Road. And I'm happy to be here today because this is where I lived. I was down there about all my life, my young life. I lived on Waughtown Street, on this street. And I'm just proud of my church, my pastor, and my whole congregation and generation. And Washington, my second great grandparents were Washington and Harriet Sophia Schuber Fries, a former slave of the Fries family. Wash was the beloved gardener of Francis family and served as a barber. They say he had a barber shop at one time. And after the Civil War, he bought property in Waughtown, and he had 13 children. And Harriet also an early follower of Reverend Harlan, once the Waughtown Baptist Church that grew into First Waughtown Baptist Church. One of his kids was Frank Fries, and he was the husband of Elizabeth Brown Fries. And after she passed away, she married John Joyce, one of the first black policemen. And She had a sister named Fanny Freeze, Joseph Freeze, Edward Freeze, and Clara Freeze. She was from the Waughtown community. And her first husband was Oscar Traynham. And her second husband was George Wesley Kleinert. And I am just proud to be here. This is wonderful. It's just wonderful. And so Pauline Freeze married Deacon Walker, Reuben Walker. He owned a grocery store in Bellevue, and he was one of the earliest black insurance salesmen in the area. So this is what I have for today, but like I said, this is just great. It's an honor. I've lived to see 5 generations, and I've got about 30-some descendants. So I've been teaching them about the community, and so they and I hope they become nurses, doctors, whatever, to help the community and the country, and just be prosperous and, like they multiply.
Grace and peace, everyone. I'm Ernestine Slade Carter. And I am, first of all, I had to Google what this last name was. And it can be pronounced as Weish. It can be pronounced as Weish. Well, since we country, we're going to say Weish. I am a descendant of Isabella Butler. She was the daughter of William Turner and Teresa Freeze Butler, and was amongst the youngest students to initially attend the Waughtown Freedman School. Her father, William T. Butler, was a wagon maker, one of few black wagon makers in the entire nation. He was one of the largest early black landowners in Waughtown and was somewhat of an early politician, and he was a registrant for the state constitution after the Civil War. He was a supporter of the Freedman School. In 1886, Isabella Butler, affectionately known as Belle, married a prominent Presbyterian minister, Reverend Robert P. Weish, who pastored the 7th Street Presbyterian Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. Eventually, it merged with Brooklyn Presbyterian, and is now called First United Presbyterian in Charlotte, North Carolina. He served as a trustee and professor of Biddle University, which is now known as Johnson C. Smith University. With her father's business acumen and his money, Belle accumulated much property in Charlotte. She and Robert, according to reports, were counted as Charlotte's better class of people. Despite her wealth, Belle distinguished herself and is most memorable for her contributions to the education of Charlotte's black children. She was regarded as one of the most distinguished black educators in North Carolina of her era. She served as principal of the Meyer Street School in Charlotte for 19 years, was one of the largest public schools in the state at that time. Following her untimely death, a school in Charlotte was named the Isabella Weish School in her honor. She and her mother helped raise her sister's children, Linnell, Agnes, Grace, and Melba Martin. Two of her nieces, Linnell and Agnes, became educators themselves. Linnell married a professor, Cornelius Carson, who taught at Hampton University before serving as head of the Tar River Collegiate and Industrial Institute in Greenville, North Carolina. Agnes was an educator herself and married Dr. O.C. Lee of Washington, D.C., who lived in Waughtown and became one of the city's earliest black dentists. Their daughter also served as an educator, and she married Philadelphia's most famous attorney, who was a city council member and civil rights activist. His name was Cecil Bassett Moore. I am so proud of each and every family here who is represented, because this lets us know how rich our family ties are to Waughtown and to the city of Winston-Salem. Even before it was Winston-Salem to Winston and then Salem, now being combined to Winston-Salem. So I'm truly honored to be a descendant. Most of my people here today, we represent the Naylor, Butler, and Lee family who are here with us today. Some of them were also very active in First Waughtown Baptist Church. And it just goes to show what we can do, what we can become. So to each and every one of you, I'm so proud, not just of myself, but for each of you also. And teach your children the history, because they too can be so prominent in making a name for our families right here in the city of Winston-Salem. Embrace Waughtown. Embrace First Waughtown. Which I embrace this entire community for the commissioners, for the every officer here, and for Spencer, my pastor, Dr. Dennis Bishop. I applaud him also, and just embrace everything that you have learned on today. This is truly awesome, truly awesome. God bless you.
Good afternoon. I'm Janice Jones Fulp, and I'm here to represent the Yokley family. With their roots in Salem and neighborhood Davidson County, North Carolina, my ancestors, the Yokleys, were in Waughtown at the time of the opening of the Waughtown Freedom School in 1866. Their benefit from the school was tremendous, and it would live on in our family for generations. By the early 1900s, our family had produced several teachers and leaders within the Baptist Church, including founders of First Waughtown Baptist. I'm proud to say that my family was a proud of First Waughtown Baptist. And first, Alfred and Callie Yokleys served on the Board of Trustees of the Color Baptist Orphanage Society and were generous donors to this important cause. Our family went on to have men to serve in World War I and to serve as drivers of the famous Safe Bus Company. Perhaps the most famous was Lamon Samuel Yokley, who was known as the Corner Pocket and the Mysterious Shadow, who played in the Negro Baseball League from 1926 to 1944, where he played for the Baltimore Black Sox, the Atlantic City Bayshore Giants, Philadelphia Stars, Washington Black Senators, Edward Giants, and the Baltimore Elite Giants. This school impacted my family in more ways than we can count, and set our family up for amazing levels of success in all areas of life. I would be remiss if I didn't add that we even have ancestors buried in the Jordan Church graveyard. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Sarah Murray Stepney, a descendant of the Pickett and Perry families. I'm also born and raised in Bellevue and a member of First Waughtown Baptist Church. Marion Wright Elderman wrote, "Education remains one of the Black community's most enduring values. It is sustained by the belief that freedom and education go hand in hand, that learning and training are essential to economic equality and independence. The people of Bellevue and Waughtown live by this principle, and it only took their building and financially supporting the Waughtown Freedman School in 1866 to prove to themselves that anything was possible for the betterment of youth. While the opening of the 1866 school was a momentous occasion, it was not the last. It was merely the beginning. In the late 1800s, there was a Moravian free school between Waughtown and Centerville, of which community grocery store owner George Penn was the teacher and director. By 1902, there was another school across the railroad tracks known as Reynolds Grove, so named for the community's illustrious Black banker, George D. Reynolds. This school soon became more formally known as the Bellevue School and was the predecessor of the Rosenwald Bellevue School that was erected on Moravia and Burgundy Streets, where some of the principals were A.J. Brown, Minnie Galloway, Walter Hawkins, and Amanda Craig. The people of Bellevue and Waughtown, however, were just not concerned with their own children, and around 1900, a society was formed which was known as the Colored Baptist Orphanage Society. This committee, led by Addie Morris, included Reverend George Holland, Reverend Pinckney Joyce, Reverend James Timlick, and Eliza Yokley. The committee appointed my second great-grandfather, the Reverend Joshua Perry, as superintendent, and his wife, for whom I am named, Sarah, as matron. And having purchased 14 acres of land in Bellevue, they opened the Colored Baptist Orphanage in Waughtown in 1913. This orphanage received great financial and technical support from the Blacks of the Waughtown-Bellevue area, especially from the First Waughtown Baptist Church. Then it was known as just Waughtown Baptist Church. And also First Baptist Church, and also the Rowan Association. It served orphan children of northwestern North Carolina until it merged into the Memorial Industrial Institute on Box Mountain Road in 1929. After the closure of the Bellevue School, Bellevue policeman John C. Joyce and his wife, Elizabeth Brown Fries Joyce, operated a detention center and a working farm for boys. In 1945, the Bellevue Civic League was organized with the betterment of youth as its priority. The charter members were W. Wright, J. Grimes, Bluth Crawford, Harry Pickett, my uncle, Jasper Greer, Reverend Henry Williamson, and Mrs. Viola Elliott Grimes. This inauguration service was held at First Waughtown Baptist Church, and the speaker was the president of Winston-Salem Teachers College, now Winston-Salem State University. In 1950, the Bellevue Civic League directed its efforts toward having a recreation center opened in the Bellevue School building, with my own mother, Frances Pickett Murray, as the first director. The league presented its proposal to Mr. L.B. Hathaway, the superintendent of recreation in the city of Winston-Salem. After very little progress and much delay, an appeal was made to the Board of Aldermen, and they voted in favor of the recreation center for the area. Mr. Hathaway said there were no funds available. A community campaign among the black citizens of Bellevue raised $500. Can you imagine that? That was a lot back then. Just think what they were able to purchase. The community campaign raised $500. From this fund, the group were able to purchase 100 metal chairs, 3 stoves, sports equipment, a piano, and kitchen equipment. Could we buy that now? A chair. The Civic League then directed its efforts toward having a school reopened in Bellevue. However, this plan never came to pass, not because the efforts of the league failed, but because integration was on the horizon. From the meager beginnings of the first school, the people of Waughtown and Bellevue have proven through their actions that education and the development of youth is always a priority. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Norma Corley, and I'm representing the Campbell family. And if you have listened to the historical comments, you haven't heard the Campbell family mentioned. So I asked Spencer, I said, were we the new kids on the block? And he said that we were here, my family was here around 1900, 1910. And so we immigrated because I know I was born in the Happy Hill area, okay? So we lived there until I was like 3 or 4, and then we moved over into what's called Manhattan, just because we had a paved road, okay? But I have to tell you about my mama. She was 4'11". You could not tell her she was short. She was very, very smart. She had skipped a grade in school. Education was very important to her. But I don't remember her telling us that we needed to go to post-secondary schools. But she led by an example. She had 4 children. She was working full-time, and she went to Russell Business College at the same time. All 6 of her children went to post-secondary education. But she, like I said, she was smart, and she was very up-to-date with the news. And so she had a friend, Mr. Wright, who was a member of the NAACP. And after Brown versus Board of Education was passed, I knew they talked about it. I was not consulted, I was only 7 years old, about attending Easthine Elementary School. So this was back in 1958, before desegregation was being mandated. And it was 3 of us that went to Easthine. Rosalind and Ricky, for some reason, after they completed Easthine, went back to the Black High School. So when I went to Hill Junior High, I was the first Black and the only Black there. Rosalind nor I can remember our second grade teacher. We can remember third grade on up, but not second grade. And that was the year that we went there. So evidently, it was very, very traumatic. I spoke to a teacher after I had graduated who was a teacher at the Hill Junior High School. I said, well, what do you remember about me being there? And he said, you look like a deer in headlights. And so it was a lot of trauma involved, but the emphasis was on the education. That was the most important thing. And people of that generation, we really felt like education was the way out, not the professional sports that people are advocating for now. I shared this morning that I always felt as though I had something to prove. So whatever the stigma or dogmas that were out there, you know, they were not going to be able to say that about Norma Corley. When I think about my experience, I don't know if I would recommend anybody doing this because it was so new, people didn't know what to do. We were learning on the job, and people were just not nice. They were just, you know, they were not nice. And we're seeing that even today. Stella Heinz and I would share notes. She was going to Anderson while I was at Parkland. I would have maybe 3 books for every 1 book that she had. But one of the crucial things that was missing was the family atmosphere, I think, that she had at Anderson that, you know, we didn't have. And even today, when we have a class reunion, I'm the only black there. The other blacks don't come. So I don't want to, for whatever reason, the Lord allowed me to be the guinea pig. And I don't want to just totally make that a negative experience. Hopefully we've learned some things now, hopefully. The main thing that even now when I was teaching the students, my main emphasis was the golden rule. You just treat people the way you want to be treated. It's real simple to me, and that was the only weapon I had, that and prayer, okay?
Thank you all so much. Each one of the speakers, I just really appreciate the wonderful spoken history you've given us for this area. And Spencer, I assume you probably captured all this, or we'll be capturing all of these in your work as well. Michelle, who's doing the benediction? Reverend Bishop, would you mind closing us out? And then we'll ask all the speakers to join us over at the marker, and we'll unveil that. So, thank you.
Since we have been here for such a period of time, we might as well just stay here for church in the morning. And we'll give one benediction tomorrow.
Very good.
After having sat and listened to such great historical facts, we can leave here today with our backs a little straighter, our heads a little higher, and more determined to carry out the legacies of those who have paved the way for us. Amen. This has really been a great historical hour. And I'm thankful for the children that were here to hear this history. Yeah. And many of those who have come up through the church. And while I'm speaking about the church, let me tell you how we became First Waughtown. We were happy and proud of just Waughtown. Yeah, we didn't have a problem with Waughtown. And because they had a new pastor and young pastor, I didn't come in to change things to make us a greater anybody. We were great because we were great. But we changed the name to First Waughtown because there is a Waughtown on Waughtown. And I had gone a couple of times to talk with the pastor there to see if we could interchange services at least once a year. And while he said to me, while I have no problem with doing that, I don't think the congregation will accept that. And I said to him, well, I know how to preach quietly. And I know how to be still. I won't run all over. He said to me, while I can appreciate you asking, I'm not sure the membership would accept that. And so I left after the second time, and I was satisfied with that. But as the years rolled on, in the late 80s, we changed the name from Waughtown to First Waughtown. And the first was added at the recommendation and the suggestion of one of our deaconess, who's now gone on to glory, Sister Charlie Brown. We were trying to figure out a name for the church, but we wanted to keep the identity. So she said, why don't we just add First Waughtown? And I said, well, that sounds good to me. And the reason we were suggesting changing the name, Brother Charles, Brother Beachy, there were times we would have funerals and other services that people would be sitting in the Waughtown parking lot. And they were asking, y'all hear Mayor Pro Tem say she's one. They would ask, we'd have weddings and people were late coming to the weddings, and they said, we sat up there until somebody finally came along and said, can I help you? And say, yeah, we're here for a wedding. Not here, maybe it's the other church around there. And we had no problem with that. We were getting their mail, they were getting our mail. Addresses was almost similar in number. But the reason we changed the name, all the other things we didn't have a problem with, but then they started calling the church, asking us, did we get a tithe check from members that was sick and shut in that was mailing, I mean, seriously, they were mailing their stuff in. No, I hadn't seen the check. I checked with Deacon Brown. Deacon Brown said, no, we didn't see no check. So they started thinking we were taking checks from them. And so that's when we decided to change the name to First Waughtown. And they still hadn't sent us our check yet. Thank you all for coming today. Spencer, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Spencer was my administrator for several years, and we had a good work relationship. The only problem I had with Spencer was that I would have to ask him 3 or 4 times, what did you say? Because he talked so fast, and I used to have to try to sit and read his lips while he was talking. And so when Spencer moved away, went to Florida, man, you talking about, and so now the Lord has brought it full circle to where even though he's in Florida, he's still now like an administrator, but I understand him better because we text. And I read the text better than I used to understand what he was saying. So thank you, Spencer, for doing this today and for everything that you do for all of us. I'm like Mayor Pro Tem. We've been running all morning. I'm in this suit because I eulogized my 16-year-old great niece today, who has been living with Down syndrome since she was born. And we eulogized her today at 11 o'clock at Mount Pleasant. But there's a guy that's been running with me all day. The mayor and the Mayor Pro Tem has been running all day. It's always good to have somebody good to run along with you, isn't it? And so there's a brother here today. Out of our 24 associate ministers and pastors that we have at the church, we have about 5 or 6 our associate ministers here today, and pastor and his wife. He's been running with me all day, as he normally does. And so I want to ask that you would permit me to ask our senior associate, Pastor Frank Smith, if he will, to come and give the benediction. And while he's coming, I'm going to ask his wife to stand back there also, Lady Smith, who is a preacher in her own rights. Would y'all accept Pastor Frank Smith and his wife as she come up and stand with him as he benedict us today?
God bless you. Certainly this has been a very exciting occasion. Makes me feel like I wish I had been born in Bellevue. Amen. Amen. If we would turn our heads to God, Father, now in the name of Jesus, God, we bless you, Father, for this outing. We bless you, Father, for having been such a good God and continuing to be good. Now, Father, we ask that you would bless these that are in attendance, bless our families, bless us all in the mighty name of Jesus. Now may the grace of God, the sweet communion of his Holy Spirit, bless, rule, and abide with us henceforth, now, and forevermore. And let the redeemed of the Lord say, I have been redeemed.
Amen. Glory to God. One more thing before our mayor comes back. The church, I'm so thankful and so proud that the Lord led me to First Waughtown back then. I'm telling you, there's such a rich history, and I'm so thankful to the people of First Waughtown for accepting me and having allowed me to stay around these many years. Next year, the church will be celebrating, and you'll be hearing more about it. We will be celebrating 157 years. And the good thing about it that I commend them for is that they've only had 5 pastors, and I'll be celebrating 40 years next year. Thank y'all.
That's great, Reverend. We'll look forward to next year for sure. Yes, let me ask all the speakers, if you would, head that way to the marker, and we'll do the unveiling. And I neglected to recognize Representative Evelyn Terry, who's here, I believe, right there she is. So let's go over and unveil the marker.